Welcome to the Unraveling the Scriptures channel. What is our true origin? Where do we come from? At some point in your life, you have certainly asked yourself this question: who am I? Where did my ancestors come from? What is my true lineage? The Holy Scriptures provide us with a detailed account of the origin of peoples. But how did different ethnicities emerge? Blacks, Asians, whites, Arabs, indigenous peoples. How did such vast human diversity spread across the planet? In this video, I present to you a deep and revealing study of Genesis chapter 10, the lineages of humanity. We will explore the origin of all nations, uncover the connection between the peoples of the earth, and unravel mysteries that may have been hidden throughout history. Get ready for a fascinating journey through the family tree of humanity. According to the Holy Scriptures, the genealogy of humanity traces back to the three sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. This narrative includes peoples with dark skin, whose Hamitic lineage is attributed to Ham, one of Noah's sons. Ham, which means hot or black in some linguistic interpretations, was the brother of Shem and Japheth. Each of these brothers is considered the patriarch of large ethnic groups: the Semites, Arabs, Jews, Syrians, among others, the Japhethites, Europeans and Asians, and the Hamites, which include African peoples and other nations with dark skin. Historically, the term Hamitic, or Amit, was used to describe the descendants of Ham. In biblical tradition and related studies, the Hamites are recognized as peoples who inhabited regions such as Egypt, Ethiopia, Libya, and parts of Canaan. These territories, rich in culture and history, were the cradle of ancient civilizations, such as the Egyptians, whose contributions to human progress are widely documented. Additionally, prominent figures in the Bible, such as the Queen of Sheba, are often associated with these African lineages, reinforcing the relevance of Black peoples in the sacred narrative and in the development of humanity. Over the centuries, biblical interpretations have been an important source of reflection on the ancestry and cultural identity of African peoples and the Black diaspora. According to the account in the book of Genesis, after the flood, Noah and his three sons were entrusted with the task of restoring the lineage of Adam and perpetuating the descendants of their father. With only 8 survivors, Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their respective wives, humanity faced the challenge of restarting its history. Ham, one of Noah's sons, is widely recognized as the ancestor of African and Black peoples. His name is often associated with Africa in the scriptures, for example, being identified as the progenitor of the ancient Egyptians in the Book of Psalms. Rabbinic traditions, Jewish folk tales, and other ancient records corroborate this interpretation, highlighting Ham as the patriarch of African peoples. The nations and regions associated with his descendants reflect the meaning of Ham's name, which in languages like Hebrew, Aramaic, and other ancient tongues means burnt or dark, a direct reference to the skin color of his descendants. This connection between Ham and African peoples is reinforced by various biblical and historical texts that locate the Hamites in regions of the African continent. In Genesis chapter 10, more details about the lineage of Ham are presented, especially in verses 6 to 14, where his descendants are named and associated with different territories. Ham is identified as the father of Cush, Mizraim, Put or Phut, and Canaan. Cush is pointed out as the ancestor of various African peoples, particularly those who inhabited the region of Nubia and beyond. Mizraim, another son of Ham, is traditionally associated with Egypt. It is important to note that even today, Arabs, Jews, and Syrians refer to Egypt as Mizraim in reference to its founder. Put is connected to regions of North Africa, while Canaan is the father of the Canaanites, a distinct people who lived in areas of the Levant, not in Africa proper. The descendants of Cush are also notable. Among them are Havilah, Sabta, Sabtecha, Ra'ama, Sheba, and Nimrod. The latter receives special attention in the Bible as the first mighty and courageous man before the Lord. Nimrod founded important cities in Mesopotamia, such as Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh, demonstrating the extensive influence of Ham's descendants beyond the African continent. This narrative not only highlights the rich ancestry of African peoples, but also connects the history of humanity to a common starting point, showing how different lineages spread and contributed to the cultural and geographical diversity we know today. The influence of the Hamites, especially in Africa, is deeply rooted in biblical traditions and historical records, emphasizing the importance of recognizing and valuing this ancestral heritage. At the beginning of his reign, Nimrod, a descendant of Ham through Cush, ruled over Babel and other cities of Mesopotamia. Recognized as the ancestor of the peoples of ancient Babylon, including the Sumerians, Nimrod later moved to Assyria, where he founded important cities such as Nineveh, Rehoboth-ir, and Calah. His rule marks the beginning of an era of political and cultural organization in the region, reflecting his skill as a powerful and visionary leader. Meanwhile, Mizraim, another son of Ham, was the progenitor of several nations in North Africa. Among his descendants are the Ludim, Anamim, Lehabim, Naphtuhim, Patrusim, and Kazluhim. The latter gave rise to the Philistines and the Caphtorites, peoples that played significant roles in the history of the Eastern Mediterranean. Additionally, Mizraim is associated with the rise of the people of Ethiopia and other African nations. Notably, Nubia, known in antiquity as the Kingdom of Cush, is highlighted as the homeland of Cush's descendants. Cush, a central figure in the genealogy of the Hamites, played a vital role in the formation of both African and Mesopotamian civilizations. Originating from the fertile lands of Nubia, he represented a cultural convergence point, especially along the banks of the Nile River, where interactions with Egyptians, Canaanites, and other peoples shaped his civilization. These relationships not only strengthened commercial and cultural ties, but also influenced the evolution of the region's social and political structures. Nimrod, the son of Cush, also occupies a prominent place in the biblical narrative. He is described as the first mighty man on earth, establishing a kingdom that included Babel, a city infamous for its Tower of Babel. This monument mentioned in Genesis symbolizes humanity's collective effort to reach the heavens, resulting in the confusion of languages and the scattering of peoples. Although the scriptures provide a limited view of Nimrod, ancient Jewish traditions portray him as a rebellious figure, possibly challenging divine orders. He is also associated with the formation of the Sumerians, consolidating his influence both in Africa and Mesopotamia. These genealogical and historical connections demonstrate the rich heritage of the Hamites, whose cultural and civilizational contributions have left a lasting impact. The diversity of peoples descended from Ham, ranging from the ancient Egyptians and Nubians to the Philistines and Sumerians, reveals a mosaic of interactions that significantly shaped ancient history and the configuration of different regions of the world. It is also believed that the peoples of southern India, including the native inhabitants of the region, share roots with Cush, as well as various other African groups such as Malians, Eritreans, Kenyans, Congolese, and Bantu people from Gabon. In the Bible, the term Cush is often associated with Ethiopia, Sudan, and other regions of Africa, literally translated as Ethiopia or black. In addition to Cush, Ham was also the father of Mizraim or Mizrahi. The designation Mizraim appears in the Bible as a reference to Egypt as a territory. This name comes from the Hebrew word Mitzrayim, used to designate Egypt. Therefore, Mizraim is widely associated with the origin of Egyptian civilization. In the biblical genealogy, the descendants of Ham are seen as the ancestors of various nations and ethnic groups, with Mizraim traditionally considered the ancestor of the Egyptians. Furthermore, Mizraim is recognized as the patriarch of the ancient Egyptians and various peoples of North Africa, such as the Berbers and the dark-skinned Tuaregs. It is worth noting that Semitic peoples, such as the Arameans, Arabs, and Israelites, refer to Egypt by the name Mizraim, a designation that appears in several ancient languages, including Aramaic, Arabic, and Hebrew. In the Book of Psalms, chapter 78, verse 51, it is mentioned, "He struck all the firstborn in Egypt, the first fruits of manhood in the tents of Ham." In addition to Mizraim, Ham had another son named Put, also known as Phut. Put, the grandson of Noah, has a Hebrew name associated with Libya, mentioned 3 times in the Old Testament. In antiquity, the Puet River was located in this same region. During the time of Daniel, the name was adapted and came to be referred to as Libya, as recorded in Daniel 11:43. According to Flavius Josephus, Put was the founder of Libya, and its inhabitants came to be called Putites, as he himself recounts. Interestingly, the name Put or Foot originates from a term meaning bow and is related to African tribal hunters. He is recognized as the ancestor of the native black Libyans as well as other African peoples. Regarding the so-called curse of Ham or Canaan, it is important to mention that in ancient times, many people misinterpreted the account described in Genesis chapter 9. The text narrates that, after Noah became drunk, Ham, instead of helping him, exposed the situation to his brothers, mocking his father's nakedness. This episode gave rise to various interpretations, some of which are well known but are not the focus of this video. Noah pronounced a curse upon Canaan, one of Ham's sons. Although this action may seem severe, it is important to consider that, at the time, respect for parents was seen as almost sacred. Despite Noah seemingly making a mistake by becoming drunk, interpretations suggest that it happened unintentionally, as he was trying wine for the first time after cultivating grapes. This explanation would justify why God did not directly punish him. It is important to emphasize that Ham and his other sons, Cush, Mizraim, and Put, are recognized as ancestors of African peoples. However, it is essential to debunk the idea that black people were cursed. Noah's curse fell solely on Canaan, the father of the Canaanites, who lived in the Middle East region. The interpretation that the curse affected African peoples is a serious and unfounded misconception. The biblical narrative makes it clear that the punishment was directed at Canaan, the ancestor of the Canaanite nations. Ham, in turn, is considered the ancestor of all African peoples and communities in southern India. He lived a long life, with a lifespan far exceeding the contemporary average, as he was born before the flood. It is reported that he witnessed the 5th and 6th generations of his descendants. Like his brother Shem, who lived around 600 years, Ham is believed to have reached or even surpassed that age. Although the Bible does not provide an exact record of his longevity, it is assumed that he lived for about 600 years. There is still no consensus on the exact location of Ham's tomb, but various theories and studies point to intriguing possibilities. Some suggest it may be in the region of Ethiopia or even Nubia. Others believe he may be buried in Mesopotamia, in the ancient land of the Sumerians. However, most agree that Ham's tomb is likely in Africa, possibly in Sudan or Ethiopia. Some even speculate that he could be buried in Egypt, which arouses curiosity given the constant emergence of mysteries in this country, known for its frequent discoveries of ancient tombs. The Book of Jubilees provides more details about Ham's old age and the events related to Noah's family, covering the 3 lineages, Ham, Shem, and Japheth. This ancient Jewish text, considered authentic during the time of Christ and even before, narrates that Ham strongly disapproved of his youngest son Canaan's decision to occupy the lands belonging to Shem's lineage, now identified as Israel. Ham disagreed with Canaan's choice to claim those lands. In the Book of Jubilees, it is told that Cush and Mizraim, Canaan's brothers, along with their father Ham, did not agree with Canaan's decision to settle in Shem's lands, which are now known as the region of Israel. Like Ham, they expressed dissatisfaction with Canaan's choice. They went to Canaan and instructed him to leave that land, believing that the lands of Africa should belong to Ham's descendants. However, Canaan disobeyed and continued to live there, disregarding the wishes of his father and his brothers, Mizraim and Cush. The Book of Jubilees also mentions that Ham was the founder of the first city and province after the flood, naming the city in honor of his beloved wife, Naeltamok. Europe is a vast continent, composed of numerous countries, each with its own culture and history. Among them we find Germany, Austria, Poland, Hungary, France, Italy, Romania, and many others. But have you heard that the Holy Scriptures reference the origins of the European peoples? Yes, the Bible mentions nations that gave rise to the peoples of Europe, naming them after their ancestors. In the book of Genesis, chapter 10, we find genealogical records pointing to the ancestors of various civilizations. For those who interpret biblical texts considering their symbolism and historical depth, the Scriptures reveal fascinating details about the origins of different peoples and nations. Among these peoples are the Greeks and Macedonians, who are mentioned in the Bible as direct descendants of Japheth, one of Noah's sons. Through ancient genealogies and traditional Jewish interpretations, we know that Japheth is considered the primordial ancestor of Europeans. Just as Javan, one of Japheth's sons, is identified as the progenitor of the Greeks, other branches of Japheth are believed to have given rise to various nations on the European continent. This knowledge, preserved through the centuries, reinforces the idea that biblical traditions and historical accounts intertwine, offering a unique view of the origin of the European peoples and their connection to humanity's distant past. The name Japheth carries a profound meaning. Traditionally, it is interpreted as beautiful or pale, but its meaning may also be connected to the idea of expansion or multiplication. This makes sense when we observe how European peoples expanded throughout history, colonizing lands and influencing civilizations in different parts of the world. In biblical tradition, the European peoples are called Japhethites, as they are direct descendants of Japheth, Noah's son. However, it is not only in the Bible that we find this designation. Linguistically, Japheth's influence extends beyond the religious realm. The Indo-European language family, which includes languages such as English, German, Russian, Ukrainian, French, Spanish, and many other European languages, is also referred to as the Japhethite language family. This naming refers to the biblical ancestor of the European peoples, reinforcing the connection between biblical genealogy and the formation of Western civilizations. This relationship between linguistics and biblical tradition demonstrates that the cultural and historical traits of European peoples were not only recorded in sacred texts, but also left deep marks on how languages and identities were shaped over the centuries. The Holy Scriptures mention the progenitors of the European peoples in chapter 10 of the book of Genesis, and also in the book of Chronicles. In these passages, we find Japheth's lineage, which includes his 7 sons and grandsons. Through the names of these descendants, it is possible to trace the origins of the ancient Europeans. In antiquity, the Israelites themselves referred to the European peoples as Japhethites, and in some cases as Javanites, especially when referring to the inhabitants of the region of Greece, who were called the children of Javan. In the book of Genesis, the descendants of Japheth are mentioned by name. His sons were Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshech, and Tiras. The sons of Gomer were Ashkenaz, Riphath, and Togarmah, while the descendants of Javan included Elisha, Tarshish, Kittim, and Dodanim. An interesting point is the biblical identification of Ashkenaz as the ancestor of the Germanic peoples. This association has endured to this day and is recognized within Jewish tradition, with Ashkenazi Jews serving as an example of this historical heritage. The connection between the biblical narrative and the formation of European peoples offers a fascinating perspective on how the ancient Hebrews interpreted genealogy and the distribution of nations. As is widely known, Ashkenazi Jews refer to the regions of Germany and other areas inhabited by Germanic peoples as Ashkenaz. This designation originates from ancient Jewish tradition and the biblical worldview, according to which Ashkenaz is considered the ancestor of the Germanic peoples, including the Germans themselves. Furthermore, Ashkenaz is also identified as the patriarch of the Scandinavian populations and other Germanic groups. In parallel, there is also a biblical figure named Riphath. According to ancient interpretations, The Irish people, direct descendants of the Celts, had a consensus about their biblical ancestry. For them, Riphath would be the ancestor of the Celtic peoples. Riphath was the son of Gomer and the grandson of Japheth, and thus is recognized as the progenitor of the Celtic tribes scattered across Europe. Besides Riphath's descendants, we find other sons of Japheth, often associated with European peoples or populations genetically linked to Europeans. A notable example is Madai, mentioned in the biblical text. His identification refers to one of the nations descended from Japheth, and he is widely interpreted as the ancestor of the peoples who migrated to the region of present-day Iran, known as the Aryan or Iranian peoples, biblically referred to as the Madaites. Among these peoples, the Medo-Persians stand out, whose name resembles that of Madai. This reinforces the idea that Madai was the progenitor of the Madaite tribes, which gave rise to the Medes, Persians, Parthians, and other groups from ancient Persia. Another set of names that stands out in Genesis 10:2 includes Magog, Tubal, and Meshech. But who were these characters? Tubal and Meshech are identified as the ancestors of the Slavic peoples, including Russians and Ukrainians. This interpretation is based on the relationship between these biblical names and the historical origin of the peoples in the region. According to many scholars of biblical genealogies and the formation of nations, Russia and Ukraine would be the land of Gog and Magog, as Tubal and Meshech are frequently identified as the progenitors of these peoples. It is essential to understand who is who in the book of Revelation and other apocalyptic prophecies in the Bible, such as those contained in the Old Testament books of Daniel, Ezekiel, Isaiah, among others. Knowledge about the peoples mentioned and the identity of their ancestors is crucial for correctly interpreting these passages. For example, Magog, Tubal, and Meshech are identified as the biblical ancestors of the Slavic peoples. Similarly, Ashkenaz is pointed out as the patriarch of the Germanic peoples. However, it is important not to confuse the Germanic peoples with the Slavic ones, as they are distinct groups, although all are genetically related as European peoples. Another highly relevant biblical character is Tarshish, one of Japheth's sons. According to historical and genealogical interpretations, Tarshish is considered the ancestor of the Etruscans, a people who played a significant role in shaping the identity of the ancient Italians and Romans. While the Romans were not exclusively descendants of the Etruscans, the Etruscan heritage had a significant influence on their genetic and cultural composition. Additionally, the Romans also had Javonic ancestry, descending from Javan, another son of Japheth. This study of the biblical origins of European peoples helps to better understand their historical and cultural connections, providing a broader view of the formation of ancient civilizations. A fascinating curiosity about Javan, son of Japheth, is that he was not only the ancestor of the Greeks, but also of peoples who, though not Greeks per se, were closely related to them. These groups share historical and cultural roots, paralleling the Greeks in antiquity. Another interesting point is that the names of Japheth's descendants gave rise to many nations of antiquity, and many of these names have linguistic variations across different languages, such as Hebrew, Greek, and Aramaic. This similarity between names is the result of linguistic adaptation over time, influenced by the dispersion of peoples after the Tower of Babel incident. According to biblical tradition, linguistic diversity arose as a consequence of human wickedness, interrupting the unity of the original language, sometimes called the Adamite language. From this division, countless languages and dialects emerged, shaping the world as we know it today. Among the sons of Javan, one prominent name is Elisha, or Elisha, identified as the ancestor of the Hellenes, Hellenes in Greek. The Hellenes were the peoples who gave rise to Greek identity in ancient times. Therefore, Elisha, the grandson of Japheth, is often pointed out as one of the progenitors of the first Greeks, the so-called original Greeks. Another descendant of Javan that sparks great interest in the scriptures is Tarshish, frequently mentioned in sacred passages. Considered the ancestor of the Tartessians, Tarshish is associated with a people who occupied the Iberian Peninsula in ancient times. The Tartessians are recognized as the first known inhabitants of the region, suggesting that the Portuguese and Spanish peoples have, in part, their origins linked to Tarshish. Although the Portuguese have other Japhethite influences, as well as a significant Semitic ancestry, their genealogy, according to biblical tradition, also traces back to Tarshish, reflecting the diverse roots that formed the present-day people. Furthermore, the cultural and historical presence left by the Tartessians in the Iberian Peninsula remains the subject of study and fascinating archaeological discoveries. Another notable descendant of Javan is Kittim, often associated with the island of Cyprus. The ancient inhabitants of this island, known as Cypriots, are traditionally considered descendants of Kittim, which reinforces the historical and cultural connection between the people of Cyprus and Javan's lineage. On the other hand, Javan's fourth son, named Dodanim, is a figure that generates some controversy among scholars. Many believe there was a transcription error, suggesting the original name should have been Rodanim. This linguistic variation could point to a connection with the Dardanians, an ancient Trojan people. Thus, this theory raises the possibility that the ancient Trojans, famous for their role in the Trojan War, could be direct descendants of Javan, further expanding the potential branches of his lineage in ancient history. Biblical genealogy and its historical interconnections are vast and full of intriguing details, offering fertile ground for various analyses on the origins of peoples. However, to avoid prolonging the topic too much, it is important to highlight one essential point. European peoples have their roots directly linked to Japheth, being therefore classified as Japhethites. This lineage not only connects Europeans to the ancient biblical accounts, but also suggests a deep link between modern civilizations and the peoples of antiquity, highlighting the rich influences that shape today's cultures. The Bible. More than a spiritual guide, the Bible is an invaluable repository of history, culture, and timeless wisdom. The Bible is an invaluable repository of history, culture, and timeless wisdom. Its accounts go beyond faith, revealing a rich panorama of the formation of civilizations and the trajectory of peoples over the centuries. In the book of Genesis, the cornerstone of the Holy Scriptures, we find the foundation for understanding genealogies and the origins of humanity. It is in this extraordinary context that the figure of Noah and his sons stands out. Noah, a righteous man in the eyes of the Lord, was chosen to preserve life during the great flood that transformed the earth. Upon leaving the ark, he brought with him not only hope, but also the responsibility for a new beginning for humanity. However, it is in the details of Noah's descendants that we find the roots of the diversity that spread throughout the world. His three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, were blessed and designated to be the patriarchs of many nations. Each of them played a key role in the dispersion of humanity, influencing cultures, territories, and legacies that endure to this day. Our focus now turns to Japheth, one of the pillars of the expansion of the peoples. In addition to sharing in his father's blessing, Japheth played an essential role in the propagation of humanity across vast regions of the earth, establishing historical connections that lead us directly to Asia. His legacy is a powerful link between the past and the present, enabling us to understand how ancestral bonds shape the course of human history. Japheth, whose name means beautiful or to enlarge, received a special blessing that would result in the expansion of his descendants across vast and distant regions. He became a crucial link in the chain of history, connecting the past, present, and future. Japheth's blessing is recorded in Genesis 9:27. May God enlarge Japheth, and may he dwell in the tents of Shem, and may Canaan be his servant. This divine promise of enlargement symbolizes prosperity and territorial growth. Among the blessings granted to Noah's sons, Japheth's seems to be the most expansive, indicating that his descendants would spread over vast territories and give rise to various civilizations and cultures throughout history. The scope of this expansion encompasses a vast geography, ranging from the lands of Europe to the regions of Asia. Japheth's descendants were responsible for populating these areas, giving rise to a multitude of nations and significantly influencing the development of humanity. The phrase, "May he dwell in the tents of Shem," suggests more than territorial proximity. It indicates a harmonious coexistence between the descendants of Japheth and Shem, a bond that, over the centuries, reflected in cultural exchanges and interactions between the peoples. The biblical journey in understanding the origins of peoples often leads us to discoveries that are supported by science. Today, genetic studies confirm the kinship between Asians and Europeans, reinforcing the biblical account that Japheth's descendants were indeed responsible for populating these regions. As we deepen our investigation into this fascinating genetic mosaic, we encounter the Xiongnu, an ancient Chinese tribe that, according to historical sources, inhabited the vast Asian steppes in the 3rd century BC, 7th and 8th centuries BC. Surprisingly, mitochondrial DNA analysis of these peoples reveals not only a predominant Asian heritage, but also a significant European inheritance, estimated at around 12%. In other words, even though they were rooted in territories far from Europe, these ancient inhabitants of Asia share genetic traits with European peoples. The grandeur of God's Word and the Scriptures transcends time, revealing itself as an inexhaustible source of wisdom and understanding. It is striking to note how, centuries before modern scientific discoveries, the Bible already outlined the complexity of the descent between Europeans and Asians, anticipating truths that have only recently been corroborated by science. Speaking of intriguing connections, as we explore the roots of Greek mythology, we come across a coincidence that sparks fascination and reflection on the origin of the very name, Asia. In Greek tradition, Asia is depicted as a beautiful woman, the wife of the titan Iapetus. This connection alone leads us to ponder possible parallels between Greek mythology and biblical accounts. Could this association be merely a coincidence, or is it an ancestral reflection of the same truths passed down through generations? Whether in archaeology, genetics, or mythology, the bonds between ancient peoples continue to resonate, revealing a surprising intertwining of history, science, and faith. And here's the reflection. Could Greek mythology, full of symbolism, have absorbed distorted fragments of biblical stories? Could Iapetus, the titan from Greek mythology, be the same as Japheth, mentioned in the Bible as the son of Noah? The similarity between the names Iapetus and Japheth does not go unnoticed, raising questions about possible connections between these ancient narratives. Additionally, there's an intriguing detail. Japheth, according to biblical tradition, was said to have settled in vast territories that extended as far as Asia. Would it not be plausible that he named this land in honor of his beloved, as was customary in ancient times, much like Greek mythology associates the name Asia with Iapetus's wife? Could this link be just a coincidence, or is there a hidden truth behind these myths and ancestral records? Share your thoughts in the comments. Could Iapetus and Japheth, in fact, be the same historical figure, or is this all just an intriguing happenstance? Chapter 10 of the book of Genesis is widely known as the Table of Nations because it describes the genealogy of Noah's sons after the flood, presenting the origin of the various peoples that formed throughout history. Among these genealogies, we find in verse 2 the mention of Japheth's descendants. The sons of Japheth, Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshech, and Tiras, Genesis 10:2. This passage marks the beginning of Japheth's lineage, which later expands, mentioning the nations that emerged from his descendants. The Table of Nations continues detailing the genealogies of Noah's sons, providing a fascinating overview of the origins of post-flood peoples. This chapter can be compared to a genealogical map that guides us through the paths of human dispersion, revealing the diversity and blessings that emerged from this lineage. Among Japheth's descendants, we highlight Gomer, his firstborn, and Noah's grandson. Although his appearance in the scriptures is brief, his descendants had a significant impact on the formation of various nations and cultures throughout history. The biblical account informs us that Gomer was the father of 3 sons, Ashkenaz, Riphath, and Togarmah. Like the other descendants of Noah, each of these names represents a new branch of humanity, carrying with them the promise of growth and dispersion across different regions. The Table of Nations not only records these names, but also invites us to reflect on how God guided the multiplication of humanity and the formation of civilizations. Studying these genealogies allows us to better understand the historical and cultural context of biblical times, as well as to recognize the importance of each of these characters in the construction of the world as we know it today. As we explore ancient traditions, we realize that Gomer's descendants played key roles in the formation of various civilizations and cultures. Each of them contributed uniquely to the construction of the history of the peoples that emerged from this lineage. Ashkenaz, for example, is often associated with the ancestors of the Scythians, a nomadic people who roamed vast stretches of Eurasia, leaving their mark on the warrior cultures of antiquity. Japheth, in turn, is linked to the Celts, directly influencing the cultural wealth and development of European societies. However, it is Togarmah, the third son of Gomer, who sparks special interest when we analyze the origins of Asian peoples. Identified as one of the main ancestors of various ethnic groups in the far north and the east, his descendants may have played a crucial role in the expansion and development of Asian cultures. This connection, traced from the scriptures, offers a fascinating perspective on the roots and ancestral heritage of these peoples. The etymology of the name Togarmah also reveals interesting nuances. In ancient Assyrian, his name can mean dominator or merchant, suggesting a possible link to ancient merchant and warrior peoples. In Hebrew, it is associated with the idea of broken, while in Phoenician, it can mean pulled or broken. Interestingly, the expression broken or pulled eyes is often associated with the distinct facial features that characterize many Asian ethnicities, further strengthening the connection between Togarmah and the peoples of the East. This analysis not only broadens our understanding of biblical genealogies, but also allows us to perceive how the scriptures interact with history and anthropology, shedding light on the origins of various peoples and their influences over the centuries. The connection between Togarmah and Asian peoples becomes even more evident when we analyze biblical passages such as Ezekiel 38:6, which mentions, "Of Gomer and all his bands, the house of Togarmah, of the north quarters, and all his bands, and many people with thee." Ezekiel 38:6. This verse is part of a prophetic context in which the prophet Ezekiel describes a coalition of nations that, in the end times, will unite against Israel. The specific mention of the house of Togarmah of the north quarters provides an important geographical indication, suggesting that his descendants settled in northern regions, possibly linked to Asian territories. This reference has been widely studied by historians and theologians to better understand the origins and dispersion of ancient peoples. In particular, the relationship between Togarmah and the peoples of the far north has led many scholars to associate him with nations such as the Turks, Mongols, Chinese, Japanese, and Koreans, who throughout history have occupied vast areas of Asia. When we consider the immense diversity of tribes and nations that inhabited these regions, the link between Togarmah and Asian peoples becomes even more plausible. The Bible not only highlights the presence of these peoples in ancient history, but also gives us a glimpse into their ancestral connections. The Chinese, for example, with their millennial heritage, may find in Togarmah a symbolic link to their ancestral roots, reflecting China's trajectory as a cultural and historical power. Similarly, the Turkish and Mongol peoples, known for their vast conquests and influences, also fit into this context, reinforcing the importance of this biblical genealogy in understanding the dispersion of ancient peoples. This approach not only broadens our view of the history and geography of Noah's descendants, but also emphasizes how the scriptures engage with anthropology and historical records, providing valuable clues about the origins and identity of the peoples who shaped the ancient world. The Mongols, across the vast steppes of Central Asia, built empires that profoundly shaped the geopolitical landscape of the region, leaving a legacy of conquests and cultural advances. In the Japanese archipelago, the descendants of Togarma gave rise to a unique civilization whose influence extends globally, whether through art, philosophy, or ancient traditions. The Koreans, with their rich and complex history, represent another branch of this lineage, playing a crucial role in the formation of Asian identity. The Turks, as heirs to a land that serves as a bridge between the East and the West, carry with them a heritage that reflects a fusion of various cultural and historical influences. The grand promise granted to Japheth that his descendants would inhabit vast and prosperous territories was fulfilled over the centuries, manifesting as a prophecy that transcended the ages and continues to materialize today. A striking example is China itself, one of the largest countries in the world by population and territory, whose ancestry traces back to the lineages of Togarma and Japheth, thus confirming what the scriptures reveal to us. I hope you enjoyed this special video where we explore the fascinating origins of all the ethnic groups present in the world, according to the Bible. If this journey of knowledge impacted you, don't forget to leave a like and share it with friends and family. May God bless your life, and we will see you soon.